Good evening, everyone. I know it's a hard night to come out. People are having a lot of mixed feelings in the day after the election, and it's awful weather out there. So it might not be a night to come out and hear what for some people might be a dry demographics report with lots of numbers and charts, but here we are. I'm Nancy Gagne. I'm the Executive Director of the South Orange Maplewood Community Coalition on Race, and we've been working on this report for about a year and a half. We're going to go to the next slide. I'm going to lose my way here. Let me just say first also that there's a certain irony that today of all days that the Community Coalition on Race, the organization that's worked on racial integration and inclusion for 20 years in our community, is coming before you to say that what you're going to see ultimately at the end is that we're experiencing a strong growth in the white population and a loss of new in-movers who are Black. So now more than ever, we really have to do the work to be truly inclusive and not just use the words. So that's part of what tonight is about. So over the last year and a half, we looked at different markers of stable integration, which has been part of our mission for the 20 years. Overall town diversity, neighborhood integration, housing values, and school district demographics. What you can't see there, I think is a little faded, is areas that we'd like to look at in the future: civic life, businesses, and social integration. So we have, like I said before, we're celebrating 20 years, and in the last year we updated our mission and our vision statements. We're staying true to the original mission with slightly new language. And our new mission says to build and sustain a community that is racially, culturally, and socially integrated and truly inclusive, where there is equity and equality for all. And that's what motivates us and moves us. Since 1996, we've been doing this. We've worked on stable racial integration, and now we're taking the opportunity to look back over those 20 years and see where we have been stable and if we're seeing some new trends that might be cause for concern or for change in how we work. Okay. So this study asks these 4 questions. What have we looked at like over 20 years? What events have impacted our demographics? Where are we now? And is there something that we can predict for the future? Next one. Oh, that one. So those are the sources of information. So we're in 2015, 2016, we're right smack in the middle of the census decade. So we have good census information from 1990, from 2000, 2010, but then we have to rely on other information to do our local demographic assessments and that support what we looked at. That includes the home mortgage data assessments, the American Community Survey data, which is a yearly survey, and it's not as complete as the census, but it does give you slightly more updated information about local demographics. And then we looked at the school enrollment data. And let me say at this point, I'm standing here presenting this information because this is what I do. I put the information together, but we have tons of volunteers who work on different committees at the Community Coalition. And there is a committee called Monitoring and Evaluation. It's been part of the process from the beginning. And they've always looked at what our housing prices are like, all the markers of stable integration. Do we have good representation of all different groups on leadership, on the board, in the staff at the schools? The committee over the last year and a half has consisted of me, our chair, Leila Gonzalez-Sullivan, Kelly Tianga, who's a trustee and also works for Shelter Force, which is a fair housing magazine, online magazine, George Robinson, who's a founding member of the Community Coalition and has been doing this monitoring and evaluation work for 20 years. David Krager, who's in his professional, he's a volunteer in his professional life. He does demographic census work, mostly with maps, and he was very helpful. And most importantly, our trustee, first a volunteer and now a trustee, Chris Stetson, who was really essential to the work that we did. He has done an amazing amount of research. He's got a lot of talent there. We can't thank him enough for the work that he's provided us with over this time. So this is the overview. I know the screen is small, and I don't want to read every bit of it, but the general points are that after experiencing this swift demographic change in the late 1990s, the demographics of the towns remained relatively stable. And we're going to see that in some charts coming up. And housing prices, and this is probably the biggest takeaway here from this slide. Housing prices rose more rapidly than other, and there's a mistake there, it should say other Midtown direct towns. The ones who are on the Midtown Direct line, in other words, through 2005, at the same time that the black population share grew. And that was really the goal, one of the opening goals of the Community Coalition on Race. How can we show people that you can have a diverse population and be competitive with every other market that isn't necessarily diverse, that really isn't diverse, including our neighboring towns. During that time period, we also, because we're going to talk about income later, the income of South Orange black residents through that time period that you see, the late 1990s through 2007, exceeded that of whites, but now we're seeing a change. And that may affect the in-mover population. There's a distinct trend in the increase in white in-movers, an increase in Asian and Hispanic in-movers, and a decrease in black in-movers. Plus, there's an increase in the white population in the elementary schools and the middle schools that will manifest later in the high schools. And just so that you understand, we're using the word black because that's the term that the census uses. We try to be consistent. Plus, as you'll see from some of our later slides, a lot of our black population is not African American; they're foreign born. Okay. So now the first area we're going to look at is racial integration, and the summary is here. So as I said before, we experienced that swift demographic change, and we still have, despite what I'm telling you about the changes that we're anticipating and beginning to see, we continue to have a higher percent of black residents than surrounding comparable communities. Even communities that have experienced a growth in their diversity, there isn't one that has the same level or percentage of black residents that we have. 23% of Soma residents are foreign born, and 41% of those are people of color. And we're going to make this point over and over again tonight. Asians, Hispanics, and most multiracial people are groups that are showing an increase in population share since the 2010 census, and we'll see that increase manifesting in the schools as well, so you'll see it go beyond 2010. And neighborhood integration varies. That has also been a really important goal of the Community Coalition on Race, to not just have diversity in the two towns, but to have residential integration. So we have modest success there, but there are pockets, mostly in Maplewood. South Orange has a little more success in residential integration. So we have in Maplewood some concentrations of white and black. Okay. All right, so this is how we break down. We provided this chart so that you could see how we compare regionally and across the state and through the nation. And our white population is nearly 58%, black or African American 34%, Asian, 2 or more races, almost 4%, Hispanic or Latino at 6%. So you can see where we're slightly above the state. The state actually in African American population is close to the national average, and we far exceed that. And then in compared to the county, we are much lower in Hispanic or Latino, yes, and about half in the Asian percentages. We also put on there, by the way, same-sex households. That information is only available through the American Community Survey. And we suspect that that is a much lower reporting than the truth for our community. We wanted to include it because although our focus is race, we know that these communities value all kinds of diversity and true inclusion of all groups. So we want to make sure that you understood that we were looking at that as well. Okay. This slide shows the percent of residents born in foreign countries. So we're fairly close in the two communities to the state, and then you can see that figure is a little low. Before I said 23%, so this is the slide that we think might need some correction, but those are the general percentages gathered from the ACS from 2013. Okay. So we have almost 7,000 foreign-born adults, and 10% of them are white. And as I said before, 41% of Soma's non-whites are foreign-born, and you can see the breakdown there. I don't think we have to do anything more with that slide, so we'll move on from there. This is striking, and we put it this way: 9 out of every 10 Soma residents is either white or black. Although we're seeing this increase in Hispanic and Asian populations, when the group first started really looking, Hispanics didn't have enough of a presence here to really even make it onto the graphs. There was enough of an Asian presence. We'll see these graphs later. But the demographic change that was so obvious happened between the white and black population. And when you put it that way, I think it helps people understand why sometimes it feels like we have such a focus on those two groups. Historically, whites and blacks have the greatest residential isolation from one another, social isolation from one another, and the tensions between one another. So the fact that we have this presence and we live together is fairly striking. Okay. Okay, this is the slide. We actually showed this in 2012 when we did a much scaled down version of a demographic report. This, I think, shows very dramatically. Maplewood on the left, South Orange on the right. They look fairly similar. You'll see in 1990, I know it's a little hard to see, so at the very far to the left is the 1990 census. In Maplewood, we're pretty much exactly mirroring national racial representation between blacks and whites in across the nation. 12%, 84%. What happens in 10 years? It's a big change. Drop off in the white population, increase in black population. Same thing happening in South Orange, but South Orange started already with a slightly higher black population in 1990, increased, but Maplewood actually surpasses it by the time we hit 2000. That's around the time in 1996 when the coalition starts, and for that first decade of the coalition's work, a little beyond the decade, is you see that leveling off, that stabilization between the two groups. Okay, we can go on from that one. This slide represents a forecast, and I have to give a lot of credit to Chris Stetson for this because he's done so much of the work and he really understands the statistics that he's been looking at over time. So he's taken from 1990, the census information 1990, 2000, 2010, that information we know. Where are we heading for 2020? Based on all the information that he has gathered, it looks like the non-Hispanic white population will continue to increase. If we are on the same path that we are on today, that population would increase. We would continue to see this steep drop-off of the black population. And then in that purple line, he's combined what he's been calling emerging race groups, which is Asians, Hispanics, and families or individuals who identify as biracial or multiracial. And he combined those so that you could see that those groups, those three groups that are showing an increase at the bottom, will end up meeting the black population in the two towns. And this is pretty striking. It's a pretty striking change. It's great that we're gaining the population, the emerging groups, but it's concerning that we're losing Black in movers. But again, it's a prediction. Okay.
Is the overall population fairly stable or growing?
The overall population from the last census between 2000 and 2010 was pretty stable. I think Maplewood gained one person, and South Orange lost 34 people or something, modest. These are our census tracts, and that's how the census identifies, where people are living and what the demographics are. We tend to know our neighborhoods by our neighborhoods, so we often use names like Montrose or Tuxedo Park. Some of those are actually self-contained, and they do map pretty closely, and then other neighborhoods, College Hill, Gulf Island, the Jefferson area, don't necessarily map to the census tracts, but there's some consistency there. But we just wanted you to have a look at that. I know you can't keep that in your head as we talk about census tracts, but I'll try and remind you of what we're talking about. We have 10 census tracts altogether. There are 4 in South Orange and 6 in Maplewood. And they were really first used by the United States Census in 2000. All right, skip ahead. Next one. There we go. So our success in Black-white residential integration varies from neighborhood to neighborhood. And in this chart, you can see that the green areas where it says Black share of residents is the higher percentage, and the orange is the lower share. South Orange in general is kind of in the middle, so that you can see why I said before that there's reasonably consistent residential integration there, but that in Maplewood there is areas of concentration in the eastern section and the western section. That would be the Hilton neighborhood, and then above Ridgewood, closer to the Jefferson neighborhood in Maplewood. Okay, go to the next one. And then we thought, well, we should look maybe a little more deeply at some of the census tract or block group levels, which are a little deeper look than the census group. And were there some notable integration shifts? So some block groups increased their integration levels by either gaining or losing in white or Black populations. And those are the areas that you see. And the numbers won't mean anything to you. That's why we tried to put the descriptors in there. Montrose, the Clinton School area, and the Gulf Island area. So those are positive integration shifts. The next one is that's our groups that seem to be moving away from integration, and that would be Hilton, which started with high Black shares that became higher, and College Hill, Valley Street in South Orange and College Hill started below the norm for Black shares and actually became a little whiter. So it's not dramatic, but it's there, it's happening. And now I'm going to introduce Layla Gonzalez-Sullivan, our chair, who's going to talk about the next section. Oh, you need me over here to change slides. No, and what am I pressing?
It will be, I know that this is a little bit blurry for you, and it's blurry even if you have it right in front of you. I'll assure you, I've looked over these numbers, and I think Nancy has most of them memorized. We will have the full presentation available, Nancy, on the website at some point?
Tomorrow.
Yes. So that, because it really does take time for you to go back in and look at some of the conclusions and observations that we've made and see whether you agree with us, and particularly if you have an interest in one of the neighborhoods, you need to get down into those numbers just like we have. We'll be happy to take questions this evening if we have time, and we can go back to some of the slides if there were ones that caught your attention particularly. And the part that I will talk about briefly, just because I think we need to put this in the context of some things that have happened in our towns and in the state and the nation over the last 20 years. Because some of those numbers that we've shown you come from these developments that have happened in things like housing and income and the Great Recession and so forth. So let's put that first one on.
Layla, tell me what I get to get.
Page down. It's a little teeny one.
Which one? I'm sorry. Oh, here we go. Thank
Got
you.
it?
Got it.
As Nancy mentioned earlier, 1995 or so was when the train line, the Midtown Direct, came through, and it made a great difference in our town. Obviously, if you live on either side, walkable distance or even drivable distance from the train station here and in South Orange and Summit and on down the line, the housing prices tended to go up and the properties became more valuable. So we did see a rapid rise in the property values along that line, all the way out. That makes lots of sense, obviously, and it's still in operation to some extent. But then within that period, most of our the black share of Soma's residents, which was about 30% or a little bit higher, depending on which of the two towns you look at, remained fairly steady up until about 2010. During the Great Recession, I'm trying to get used to that language even now, which was 2008, 2009, many of the housing prices in both towns, local towns near us, and around the nation fell. And we had a lot of foreclosures and other things that were really devastating for families. Our prices, as we've been monitoring it, have not come back up and grown or come back up to pre-recession time in the way that they have in other parts of the country. So that's still an issue for some of us. And one of the things that we do look at is who's applying for mortgages. It is another way of measuring what's happening in the housing market. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. In the meantime, a very interesting fact, I think, is that the median household income for blacks in South Orange, back in the early 90s and on up, actually was higher than the median income for whites in both towns. We have seen a dramatic change in that since 2007. And so what we're seeing now is a growing income gap between the white population of our towns and the black population. And I would actually throw in there that for other groups like the Hispanics that are coming in, that income gap although we're not going to show you the statistics, but the income gap exists there as well. So as far as the mortgages go, for those that choose to report on their mortgage applications, what race they are, we have some data that can be helpful. So let's go to the next one, which is not easy. Let's see if I can interpret this one a little bit. When you look at what we've got here is starting with Springfield, West Orange, Maplewood, South Orange, on up to Montclair, Chatham, and up the line to Melbourne, which is this top blue line, and they mark as having sales prices that seem to have been higher than most of us. But looking at South Orange, which is this little pink one here, you can see that South Orange's prices have started out in the 1995 or so at around 400,000 for houses, went up to a peak of about 200 in 2007 or so, up to maybe a little bit more than 600,000. But since that time, I'm sorry, yeah, 600,000. And now, as we look at 2015-16, they've kind of settled right on the line of 600,000 for South Orange homes. I don't know whether that's your experience, but it might be interesting for us to talk about that. The other line that's important for us to look at is Maplewood. Let's see, here was orange. Did I get that one?
Yes.
Yeah, here it is. We tried to make some of these darker, but is that correct? Yeah. It starts down here even below 400,000, and then it goes up, kind of marking along the same path, but a little bit lower than South Orange. So you can see how our housing prices went up to right about the time of that Great Recession. Then they went down, and they still have not really come back up to anything like the peak that you see there. Again, when you look at the actual numbers more closely, it really is very interesting to see how we differ from some of the other towns, especially along the Midtown Direct. And the other thing that I would point out is that when you look at towns like Chatham, and they're the ones that have these higher numbers, Chatham and Madison, for example, those are towns that have buildable land. They can still put houses up, they can put developments in. We are not able to do that very much. There's hardly any buildable land in Maplewood unless you take down somebody else's old house. And so what happens then is when they put these new large houses, which are still very desirable because of how close we are to the city, the prices and the home values in towns like that are going to be higher because we can't, because we tend to try to use what space we've got and put condos and rental units in. That's going to change and lower our housing prices in the South Orange area. So that issue of buildable land really does have an effect on our housing prices. Let's go to the next one. Okay. What we have on here is the numbers of. Yeah. These are numbers that we pulled from the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data. So that people, as they make applications for mortgages, they provide information that gives us another way of looking at what's happening. And in particular, we were anxious to see what's happening in the numbers of mortgage applications of non-Hispanic whites and then again of non-Hispanic blacks. So we're really looking at these two lines. And what you can see is that for, it's always been lower. The number here is about 40% for black applications starting from around 2007, right around the time of the recession. And the white applications for mortgages were up in the 60% area. And now, as you look at it in 2014, you can see that the whites have begun to apply for more mortgages, and we see a real strong decline in the black mortgages applications. Not everybody has to declare what their race is. So we work with the ones where people have declared, and you can see the dotted lines down below, particularly the Asian ones, that will give you some sense of the applications that those folks are doing. But we do think that this mortgage application record may be an indicator of whether there's a racial shift happening. We have talked, first of all, let me give you the caveats on that because we've had a lot of discussion about it. But these data do not cover people who come in to rent. Okay, this is only people that are applying for home ownership. And it does, the data never tell you about the race of the home seller. So, you know, we've talked about, well, if it's a black family that sells their home, but it's bought by a white family, which happened in my neighborhood, you know, what happened there in terms of the composition then? So it's hard because we can't tell we can't tell about the seller and then make some judgments about whether that means we're losing or gaining people of color. And the other thing that kind of comes in is that some people think it's so great to live here that they move from Maplewood to South Orange or South Orange to South Orange. So we also can't capture that. All we can capture is that people apply for mortgages in these numbers, and that we see many more applications from whites along the way, and fewer of them by black families. Okay, let's give this one a try. At least I'll do my. Again, this is one of the excellent charts that Chris Stetson produced for us. He loves making these comparisons, and he's very good about showing us that yellow being the good side and the red being the low side. What I really just want to point out to you is that it seems like blacks are purchasing fewer homes in Soma compared to those years before around 2007. And so what we're also seeing is, well, just in comparison with the mortgages for whites. So you can see, again, this is broken out by the census tracts and which ones from South Orange and then from Maplewood. Some of them have gained a lot, and some of them have really lost population or not gained any. Like these I think had maybe 1 or 2 mortgage applications in the periods that are covered there. And we can tell you lots more about that if you have serious questions later. Let's go on to the next one. Okay. The other thing which we also mentioned is that originally in 1999 up till around 2007, the blacks that lived in South Orange had incomes that actually exceeded that of whites in South Orange and Maplewood. But by 2012, you can see there's a major change here. The red lines are South Orange white folks, and then the red dotted lines are South Orange African folks. And look what happened in that one in terms of income gap. Drops for the black families from a maximum of about 140,000 combined income for the year, and now it's down to 100,000. And then for the Maplewood folks, the Maplewood whites, again, tracking a little bit higher than the South Orange people, and the Maplewood black family incomes are also going down. And for comparison purposes, this is United States white people overall, where the average is about $60,000 per year in income, and for African Americans across the country, it's more like 40,000. So you can see that we do live in a quite affluent area, but we're also seeing some changes for some of our residents that appear to be really negative ones for them. So, and of course, depending on your income, that makes a difference on whether you can afford to buy a house. Yes, sir.
Oh, I was just, could these statistics be affected by migration patterns? So, could there have been an exodus of wealthier black retirees by 2012, which I could have led to that drop to the remaining, the lower average?
We think not, actually.
Pardon?
Can I answer this?
Sure.
Yeah.
We think not, because we're finding that we haven't actually lost overall population, that African American households that are empty nesters are staying in town. They're not moving out. They're just, the people who are moving out are being fully replaced by more whites than anyone else.
Yeah, that's a phenomenon that we're also trying to watch. And one of the other theories that we've talked about is that African American families tend to wait to move to the suburbs, to move to this area until their kids are ready to start school. It's just a theory. And that there is some sense that white families come sooner. When they decide they're going to have a suburban life and have kids and all that, they come and they have their babies and then several years later, the baby's getting to school. So again, you know, there are a lot of different speculations that any one of us could make. The numbers really do provide us with a lot of food for thought, if you will. But again, you know, one of our other questions that we've asked is that when we look at places like West Orange and Montclair, those towns have seen a significant growth in African American and Black families, while we're seeing this downtrend. So part of our question is, you know, are people now going to those other towns for a number of reasons, and we'll come back to that eventually. But our sense is that, and this was another thing that we had in our findings, that African Americans who do have a relatively high income, 100,000 or more, have shifted away from moving to Essex County as a whole, and they're looking at places like Nassau County, Suffolk, out on Long Island, Hudson County with all of the high-rise that seems to be coming in, and Orange County in New York, which is quite a distance, but still manageable. So part of our continuing study is to see, you know, if we're not attracting these folks, where else are they going, and why are they going there instead of here? That is an important question for us. I think I'm going to skip this next one. We have another thing here, with another chart which talks to you about the average income of the towns. Across the bottom, again, the towns that are on the Midtown Direct, and the percentage of, the blue line is the percentage of the town's average income, so, which for places like Springfield starts down around 100,000 and goes all the way up to Millburn at more like 250. At the same time, what we are trying to compare here is the percentage of those towns' households that have incomes below 7,500. And this chart I find fairly confusing because I'm mostly looking at the percentages over here. And you can see Millburn has a much lower percentage of people with the low incomes than most of the rest of those towns. So you have to kind of think about why are those lines crossing and what do they signify. Okay. This next one is, we're going to have to look at that one on our website, sorry. In this case, what we're looking at is that there are 13 towns in New Jersey that have household incomes that are more or less like what we have for Blacks. And on average, most of these towns do have a higher share of Asians and Hispanics. I'm not sure even from here I can see it, but we've got some that are like North Bergen, Bergenfield, West Hampton and Burlington, and so it's really scattered across the entire state, not just right in this area. And again, you know, there are some areas that have higher incomes for their Black residents, and then there are some, including Maplewood down here, where we're showing lower household incomes. Okay. One of the things that I'm concerned about and continuing to raise is the issue of affordable housing, which is on our next slide. As you know, all of our towns are required to provide a certain number of affordable housing units in the town. And at the moment, although there's still some discussion and court action in play, both of our towns do have affordable housing as they're required to. Affordable housing, by the way, is housing where the occupants pay no more than 30% for their income. So if you're earning $75,000, which is the top of that bracket, then you're looking at maybe paying $25,000 or so for your housing, which is not a whole heck of a lot, even for renting. So in the issue that we're looking at the moment is that the affordable housing units can have different groups that can apply for those. There are senior citizens, there are families with the income below 75,000, and then there are people with special needs. And we have some summaries of how many housing units are available. But if you look at Maplewood, we have a fairly small, of our 8,000 or so homes, only about 2% of those are actually classified as affordable housing. And what you see is that they're all in for special needs and senior citizens, which we do need to serve. But then what happens to those families that also need affordable housing? If you look at South Orange has about 5,500 housing units, and they dedicate about 1.6% of those units to the people that qualify, and we have the same situation there. Yes?
Is that inclusive of single-family homes, apartments? that
Tell me a little bit louder, please.
Sorry, is that inclusive of single-family homes, apartments, multi-family homes, or is it just?
It can be apartments, it can be units in a multiple unit home. I think there are some that have like 4 kind of apartments and the owner lives in one of them, but the others may be affordable. And if you look at a building like Third and Valley, they have set aside 20% of the units in that new facility that are supposed to be for affordable housing. And of that 20%, some of that is dedicated specifically to veterans, which I personally really approve of that. But as new units, new facilities are built, the builders are required to set aside that 20%. They don't have to do it in the building that they are building, but they have to make sure that there are the correct number of units. So sometimes what builders will do is to take over a house that has multiple units that needs to be renovated or something, and they'll do that, and then that counts. Yes?
Isn't it 10%? Isn't the requirement for affordable housing 10% for the new construction? I mean, I know it's all negotiable by development, but I think it's 10%.
In speaking of the 20%, I was referring specifically to that new building.
What they dedicated.
Yeah.
New Valley, 10%.
No, I was more, as best I know, it was supposed to be 20% of the units.
And articles about it, but
And I think 10% were supposed to go for veterans. Question?
Is the affordable housing clustered in just like apartment complexes, or are there actually homes, like family homes, single family homes?
There are single family homes that are at a level that would qualify. There are not very many of them, and it tends to be more often some kind of a rental arrangement or a multi-unit house. And
it exists.
I haven't really thought about that one there. And we, both towns have very long waiting lists for the affordable housing that is available. Let's see. Okay, one last slide and then we'll go to the school data. We wanted to know how many rental units there were in the 2 towns as opposed to owner-occupied housing units. The owner-occupied housing units can be multi-unit homes, but the owner's living in one of those. And what we have discovered from the data we've collected is that in the 2 towns, about 75% are owner-occupied versus 65% in statewide in New Jersey. And about 18.5% of our residents in the 2 towns live in some form of a rented unit, as opposed to about 31% of New Jersey residents. We have, and then the other thing which one of our questions was, well, what about the people that are renting, and how do they then relate to the schools? How many of them have kids? And what we found, using again the 2010 census, which, you know, now we're 6 years ahead of, or away from that, was that we have about 689 rental units where there are school-age kids, and we have about 3,672 owner-occupied households with school-age children. Now, you remember I said Maplewood has 8,000 or so homes, and South Orange has 55, and there are a few of us who do not have school-age children who are still living in these towns, so that's why these numbers look specifically at the groups that do have kids in the schools. And you can see that our renters really have quite an impact then on what's happening in the schools, because we do have that many units with kids at home. And with that, I'm going to, I think, turn it back to you.
Okay. Thanks, Leila. One of the reasons we wanted to include the rental versus owner-occupied information is that sometimes, one of the reasons we started this whole project is that people rely a lot on anecdotal information. Lots and lots of people are going to private school. The lower grades have mostly white children in them now. We have a huge rental population that has an effect on our school system, and we really wanted to bring out, well, what's really happening. And while that rental population is not insignificant, it's not so substantial that it, you know, I mean, you can see that the preponderance is really owner-occupied. But it does show that we do have a significant transient population also. People, I mean, some renters stay for a very long time, but the tendency is greater movement. And before I get to the school stuff, I do want to mention a couple of things. First, about the home mortgage information, just because I have a lot of this information more in my head than Leila does, and you did a great job. Just want to point out that even though the application rates are lower, it's the application rates themselves, not rejection rate. And that is really important to know. It's not that we're finding that blacks are unable to get mortgages to live here. They're just applying in less numbers. So that's one important piece of information. I'm going to mention Montclair and West Orange because it was a little different than what Leila said. Actually, beginning in 2010, we could see that Montclair was on the path that we are just beginning to enter on now. That they were gaining in white population and losing their black population. So it started a lot earlier for Montclair than it did for us. West Orange is moving in the opposite direction. They are gaining in African American population. They have gained a lot in Hispanic population. And if any of you know West Orange, it tends to be a little pocketed. I don't have an analysis of their residential integration, but you can, if you know certain neighborhoods, you know where people live. And we did ask that question about income because we wondered, are we losing our market? And one of the things that we found is that there are communities, and if you look at that slide online more closely, with all the different towns like Lumberton and South Plainfield, West Hampton, Aberdeen, West Orange, they are commanding a greater presence of African Americans who have that 100,000 more per year income, family income or average income. And so we didn't really lose the market. And as Leila mentioned, there were other non-New Jersey communities, Nassau County and Orange County, that are also open to that market. And so it hasn't gone away for us. So our question ultimately will be, as we get toward the end, is what do we do about this? You know, how do we continue to attract the market that is out there? Okay, so let's go to school enrollment trends. We're going to look at the summary. So we're not at our highest, but we have a lot of kids in our school district right now. It averaged 6,200 since 1998. We're almost at 7,000 by the end of 2016, or in the 2015-2016 school year. This is one of the things that we hear a lot about. Everybody's leaving, or this group is leaving for private school. And pretty much since I've lived here, since I've been paying attention to this since 20 years for me. We have not really exceeded the state average for children leaving the school district to attend private school. In our community, out of that 10.7%, 9%, let me just check that, I think it's 9% of black students and 17% of the overall white student population leaves for private school. So it's not that dramatic. We're not, we offer a really good education, wonderful schools, and people are not leaving in droves. Sometimes you will hear that, but we want to dispel that as anecdotal information, and there are the facts. Overall, black enrollment has decreased for 10 consecutive years. That would not be something that a lot of people would believe if we weren't here to give you the statistics and the reality. Between 1998 and 2014, it fell 18%. Overall, white enrollment during the same period has grown 22%. Hispanic enrollment has increased, and so has the Asian population or enrollment, although it has plateaued. All right, we're going to go to the next slide. So this is the overall school district, and you can see that in around 2007, the white and black population kind of met one another. The white population has been on an increase, the black decrease. The red line is the emerging groups that combines Hispanic, Asian, and people or families who identify as two or more races. And that's between 1998 and 2015. We can go to the next one. This one is a cohort of first grade enrollment from 1998 to 2015. And you can see that early on, the white and black started out around the same and stayed fairly level. But since around the time of the introduction of Midtown Direct, it starts to drop off for black population or enrollment and increase for white. And we're seeing that increase through that cohort through 2015. And I'm just going to take a moment to say, and make a note on that slide. Yeah, let's just stay there for a second. There's a difference between the overall population and the school enrollment. So the black share of Soma school enrollment has been falling, but not because of an absolute decline in black households. In fact, the share is slightly up in the two towns, not down. And I know that that's hard to think about, but even though we're seeing changes in the schools, it doesn't mean that the overall population has changed. And like I said before, in answer to somebody's question, we're finding that blacks move in a little later, but they stay longer. So the overall households haven't changed, even though we're seeing the change in the earlier grades that is beginning to move up through the later grades. And that's what we're going to show next. Okay. In this slide, the orange lines are white cohorts, one beginning in 1998, one beginning in 2005, first grade through 10th grade. And you can see how in the dotted lines for whites and blacks are almost the same in first grade in 1998, and then they diverge. So you get that cohort is 54% black by the time they get to 10th grade, and only 35% white. That's the 1998 cohort. The 2005 cohort, they start very far apart. Higher percentage of whites, lower percentage of blacks, and they do begin to meet because, as we'll see, there's an influx of African American students in 8th, 9th, and 10th grade. And you can see how that's reflected in how they approach one another by the time they get from first grade to 10th grade. But it does show that beginning in 2005, there's already a fairly dramatic difference between the percentages in the presence of whites and blacks in the school system. Okay. All right, we'll just go through. This is overall elementary school population. Again, stable consistent, excuse me, white and black, fairly flat with the other populations through 2005, 2006, and then it starts to separate. So an increase in white, drop off in black, increase in the emerging populations overall. Go to the next one. This is Tuscan. We were asked by a few people to break it out by school, so we did, so that you can get a sense of what's happening in different areas of the community. In Tuscan, it somewhat mimics the overall, but you'll see the increase in white, pretty dramatic drop off in the black population, and the trend, as it says at the top for this school, is now the growth of the emerging race groups. All right, let's go to the next one. How are we doing on time? Oh, pretty good. Okay, Clinton Elementary had a huge drop off in the black population and a big increase in the white population. And it's dramatic, and it begins a little later than it does for Tuscan, but a little more drama there, and definitely an increase, one of the bigger increases in the emerging race groups. All right, let's go to the next. Seth Boyden. You can see Seth Boyden in right around the time of the demographic change. It had the highest percentage of any school in the district of black population, very low percentage of white. If you were here during that time, you would remember that this was cause for great concern of the community. The towns went through a whole redistricting process, not a particularly stable solution, and then again revisited how do we better integrate, or more stably integrate Seth Boyden. And then Seth Boyden was designated as a demonstration school 2000, 2001, right around there. And that's where you can see the growth in the white population, and that stayed stable up until around 2011, 2012, and then it starts to fall apart a bit. And you can see that there's an increase in black, decrease in white, and of course it's cause for concern because we want our schools to be integrated, and we certainly want Seth Boyden to be a success as in its attempt to attract families from outside the sending district. Okay, we can go to the next. Marshall Jefferson also shows the emerging race share of students has been rising steadily. The white share increases have kind of plateaued, and there's an ongoing decrease in the black share. Okay, next one. South Mountain. Here it's interesting because the black population has dropped so far down that the emerging race groups have now surpassed in presence in that school, and the white population has continued to grow, stabilize somewhat, and then shows evidence of growing again. Okay, we'll go to the next. There's Maplewood Middle School, around 2009, the two groups crossing over, and white increasing, black decreasing through 2015, and fairly flat, but definitely seeing a Hispanic and Asian presence. Okay, and I think we have South Orange next. Same thing, happening slightly later, maybe a year or two later, but the same pattern is happening in South Orange Middle School. Okay, next slide. And there's the high school, where both lines have been flat for a number of years, and but with that tendency to increase in white a little later, because as the lower grade populations move up, we're seeing that increase in white just happening slightly later at Columbia, and drop off in black and Asian and Hispanic staying fairly level. But that will likely increase as those groups move up, that we've seen evidence of in the earlier grades. Okay. All right, are you doing, you taking over?
We can sort of do it together.
Okay.
How about that?
I'll stay up here with you.
As you have heard from our discussion, and by the way, one of the things I wanted to remind people, on some of those school charts, the higher number ended up being blue. Sometimes it reflected the black population, and sometimes it was the white population. So it gets a little weird when you look at those. And that's, again, why we suggest that you really need to sit down and look at the whole thing. But we have seen since 1997 that the housing prices rose, and then at the Great Recession in 2007 began to move downward, and that has affected the people that are coming to the towns and buying our properties. We have not yet recovered entirely with housing prices, but they are beginning to go back up.
You want me to do the next one?
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, I'll just read this one out. The lack of lower cost housing has an effect as well. We currently serve, well, as I said before, families making over $100,000 in terms of housing affordability, but we have fewer options for those earning less than $100,000.
And even with the increase in whites that we're seeing, and that trend line that's beginning in the first grades, showing more white kids in the schools, and with the emerging race groups, we still have a very high black presence, much higher than in other areas. And as we said, the overall proportions of mostly black and people of color is roughly 30 to 35%, and then the rest is roughly the white population. And that's been pretty steady over many years.
And as we said a number of times, blacks tend to stay longer in Selma, and that's contributed to the stability of the black population overall. But there is concern that that could change as we watch the populations move through the schools and who is continuing to move in.
And as Nancy said at the very beginning, part of the reason the coalition began was because there was some fear that white families were moving farther west and leaving us as black families began to push in from the urban areas. What we're seeing now is a change again with white reentry and a decrease in black in-movers. And I guess one of the things that we've talked about is that maybe the coalition had such success that we attracted all these great people who want to come and live in this type of a community, and now we're kind of like suffering from our success because the families from parts of New York and so forth, white families, still find this a very desirable place to come and to raise their families. So I'd like to attribute it to our success. We understand there are a lot of other factors going on as well.
And I want to call your attention to that term reentry. We worked really hard to find a way to describe this. Some people have used the word gentrification, but it just does not describe the phenomenon. And reentry is more consistent with, because the housing prices haven't changed, our economics haven't changed so much that you could call this, we didn't suffer blight or a change that bringing white people would trigger the term gentrification. But it is a return of more white people and increasing that population, bringing it closer to what it was prior to the changes in the mid-1990s. The increase in Asians and Hispanics is consistent with national trends in suburban demographics, and this is something we're really interested in learning about, studying a little more. I recently read a study about successfully integrated communities that provide pathways for what we have called these emerging groups, Asians and Hispanics, and calling them quadrivial communities, in which there is a good, strong presence of all four groups.
Now, one of the other things that we haven't shown in the slides, but you've probably heard about, is the movement now away from the far out suburbs, where the McMansions were all built, and now people really prefer to be moving closer into the city. Yes.
So just, so I worked as an economist at the Port Authority, and we actually looked at a lot of these same trends. We looked at 18 counties through New York and New Jersey. And I think in particular, after the recession, the job growth in New York was so much more robust. I mean, you can say, I mean, there are a lot of service jobs and lower paying jobs, but grew so much more rapidly than anything in New Jersey. That combined with the fact that I think we had a lot of couples, my wife and my age, who moved out to Brooklyn, started families, grew out of Brooklyn, but literally weren't able to find jobs in New Jersey. That it becomes this locus where you keep your job in the city, and it doesn't pay to go further out because you don't want to add to your commute. So that's just some additional dimension of pressure that I think is shaping the change.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, where are we here? We are on increase in whites and decrease in blacks. Third one.
The increase that we're seeing is somewhat inconsistent with the rest of the country in the sense that the black presence is growing more modestly than what we're seeing here, and that the white presence in the suburbs overall in the United States has dropped by 16%. And again, I think there's this I don't know quite how to call it, but it's just sort of contracting back around the cities where people did live many years ago before we all decided we needed to be in the suburbs. So we're seeing a lot of those trends and movements, and they do make a difference then in how we're going to react and work together in our communities.
This next point just again speaks to the issue of income and how different groups choose the communities that they want to raise their families in or live in. So nationwide, whites and Asians tend to live in wealthier neighborhoods than blacks and Hispanics, earning the same annual income. So whites and Asians will stretch, and blacks and Hispanics may actually choose a community in which their income is higher than what they need to actually live there. So they could have chosen a more expensive community to live in, and there tends to be more clustering of those groups, which contributes to what we were talking about earlier with residential isolation.
Yeah, and I think again, as Nancy pointed out, if we're seeing groups of blacks and Hispanics coming into areas like West Orange, quite frequently somebody already lives there, relatives or they're attached to a church or whatever, and so they do tend to move to communities where they have connections already. Okay. And our final thoughts, which is simply kind of pulling all this together and then leaving it for you to also think about what does this mean for our towns, for yourselves as residents and so on. But as we said along the way there, we have a good reputation as being welcoming, being people who value diversity and inclusion, and we have homes and the train line and our schools and so forth, all of which are very attractive. There probably was a time many years back when we were sort of the only game in town, but that's clearly not what's happening now. There are other towns that also offer some of those same benefits.
Okay, sorry. So the Great Recession reduced many people's buying powers, and the decrease in asset ownership has definitely been proportionally greater among minority households nationally, and we're probably feeling the effect of that as well.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we've also talked about is that, and you can see this with some of the reports that we all receive about recent sales in our neighborhoods, A lot of times, the homes in Maplewood and South Orange sell for more than the asking price. And if you get into bidding wars and things like that, it may be possible that certain families have just enough to buy that house at the selling price. And then all of a sudden, there's a bidding war and the price goes up another 20 or 50,000, and they're out of the bargaining before they can barely start. That goes back to other studies that have been done on the types of assets that black families might have, and, which may not include real estate and investments and all of those other things that some people can draw on. But that is possible. If their buying power goes right up to here and it can't go any farther, it does limit what they can do.
Yeah, so just to add to that, we do have nearby communities that may now offer some of the same things that we were the only, Maplewood and South Orange were the only towns that offered that before. If there's a presence of diversity and it can be attractive and that there are strong schools and lower property taxes, this may be a place for people to move. And that's the benefit is that if we had that effect, not just us alone, but South Orange, Maplewood, and Montclair together that had this diversity over 25 years ago, if we had a regional effect, we consider that a good thing.
Yeah, and we do, I think, again, as we're coming close to the next census in 2020, it's going to be very interesting to add on to what we've seen so far. The question for our towns and certainly for the coalition is, we have all of this information and there are some places in there that suggest actions that we can take. And so our board has been talking about what is it that we should be concentrating on. How do we address some of these things that we've seen, and in particular, how do we continue to be really attractive to the different groups of people that we would like to have join us and live with us here in the towns.
So that is the full report, and the PDF will be up on our website tomorrow, so that you can look more closely at the charts. But we really do, we ask that question in all seriousness to the community, to individuals, to other groups, because it's not just the responsibility or the responsibility of the Community Coalition on Race to solve this. We wanted to bring the information out, but we do all have to work together to address what will make our community in an ongoing way into the future attractive to all groups, so that we have the same kind of market and demand for people wanting to move here as we have experienced in the past. And now we'll open it up to some questions.
Do you have any sense as to how people from the Middle East kind of self-identify? Because I don't know that they would call themselves Asian, okay, and maybe not black, so do they call themselves white by default, or?
One of our researchers, Chris Stetson, mentioned South Asian as one of the terminologies, one of the ways that people could identify, because they don't necessarily see themselves as white or black or Hispanic or any of the other groups. But that's, I think that's going to be really interesting in terms of the next census, because they're trying to figure out how many more categories they can add in. At this point, we've got things that say 2+ races, but it's very hard to determine which two we're talking about, and in some cases it's more than that. But that's the only term that I've heard recently about that group.
I was also really curious, so at the same income level, you've indicated that, kind of the whites and the Asians tend to go to the, pricier neighborhoods, whereas the blacks might go to less pricey neighborhoods. Do you think that has anything to do with family size? Or is there does the family, at an income level, is family size relatively constant, so that's not a factor?
Yeah, we did not look at family size, and I wouldn't quite put it that, even with the same income that they're choosing a lower income neighborhood, it's, as it's been explained in, other researchers, much better than ours, work, that, there's because of this lack of, generational assets among some groups, like African Americans, there's a higher comfort level with moving to a place where you've got that excess in income to pay for your mortgage and your property taxes. So, yeah, I haven't seen anything connecting any of that to family size.
Yeah, there was an excellent article in the New York Times about a month ago that talked about that, where one family explained why they chose to stay in a less affluent neighborhood. And again, it had a lot to do with family being close by, being in a church.
Yes.
They've got the house and it's paid for or whatever. So there were a lot of factors for why they might choose to stay there. And I know from my own background in Hispanic, as a Hispanic person, you always want to be where the family is. You can have a bed and food if you stay close enough. So there are, some groups, some cultures that really prefer that community feeling to having the most beautiful house out there too far away from everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm just curious. I know we look at things from a black versus white and other cultures, etc. But even within black, there's a huge amount of diversity, and how an African American may choose to acquire a home, choose a neighborhood, etc., may be very different from a person from the Caribbean. So, have we looked at that dynamic, and has any of that dynamic colored the results that we might be seeing?
Joel is one of our trustees. And he's very familiar with the presentation, but you weren't here when we talked about I'll just remind you that, what was it, 41% of the African American community, or the black population here, is foreign born. So yes, it does make a difference, but we haven't gone down to that granular level to see where are those people actually living neighborhood-wise. There's a sense that there's some clustering of groups that have had a long-term presence here, Nigerians and Haitians, but even that, we haven't looked at that, so I can't even say for sure that that clustering hasn't broken up since, 10 or 15 years.
I'm a realtor for Sotheby's. I'm vice president of global markets for prominent properties. And I've just come back from the National Association of Realtors, where the chief economist, who reports to the President of the United States, speaks for 4 hours on trends in the United States and globally. And some of the trends that you should be aware of is that the entire United States has a shortage of housing inventory. So it's not just here, it's across the whole United States. And also that we have the lowest level of home ownership in history. Only 50% of the United States residents actually own homes at this point. And it's not because of income, it's because there is a new trend to rent. The millennials are bigger than the boomers, and the millennials rent. Also, he said, and I continued to hear him for 26 years, that the next 3 years there will be more millennials than now staying at home with their families. That this will be an increased trend, not a decreasing trend. So,
did anyone ask the parents about that?
a lot of the people who sit on the, say, can we please get my son out of the basement? I mean, these are people in their 60s and they still have their kids.
How much does a college tuition factor into that?
Huge. The two biggest issues in the economy are college debt, coupled with, I'll give you a second one. College debt is number 1. Number 2, I will think of, I was up till 3 o'clock in the morning. But we have inflation, we have inflation coming, so we are going to have, no matter who the president is, interest rates will go up in December, and then will go up 2 more times in the spring. But the trend in the United States is towards rentals. So it's not particular to this town or this area, this is the trend. He was even talking about the boomers not owning homes. That the people who are most likely to buy a secondary home are going to be over the age of 60, which is far older than it has been. And they're going to buy a secondary home, and they may actually rent that out and rent a house and not own their primary residence. So there are gigantic shifts in the way we are living, which we're not even looking at here, that are going across the country. But this millennial generation, which I suggest you really focus in on, and I can help you really give you information, is a bigger population than the boomers. They're probably not going to even consider or be eligible to purchase a home until they're in their late 30s.
Right.
They're not interested in purchasing a home either because they're nomads. So we're going to have less of the population owning homes, and that's why all the building of rental units is going up.
Yeah.
Everywhere. It's not just here, because that is what the demand is for. They want sustainable communities, and we are, South Orange, I will say, is, checks off in every single area as a sustainable community. And that's what they're looking for. So everyone is moving towards the city, and the UN, the biggest thrust of the UN is building the city that we need that is affordable. Because now we can't continue to build the way we're building, with the population growing the way it's growing in the United States. So we have to build sustainably, we have to build differently. The whole way that contractors are building in the cities is shifting dramatically. So there's some major, huge shifts going on in how we're living. Plus we're living longer. So we're not going to the retirement home. We have like 4 different ways we're going to live in our lives. So you see a lot of transition into West Orange.
Yes.
Huge amount of movement into, now why is that? That is because the boomers have, 25 years to live before they go to the retirement home. And they want to be in a place where they don't have maintenance, where they have a luxury lifestyle, where they can rent. Okay, so you have a whole different way of living that never existed before. So these are things also to think about, besides just looking at this, is what is going on as far as how people are now living.
Yeah, thank you for all that information. I think, the patterns of the different generations definitely will have an effect, and we have certainly seen the towns try to be responsive to the need for more rentals, and as Leila pointed out, it's a struggle for us because we have, limited opportunities to build, but they're doing what they can. Also to pay attention to seniors aging in place. As many of you may know, if you don't, there is a study going on with a lot of community group input and individual input about how we can maintain seniors who want to age in place, whether they move into a rental property or stay in their home.
And they don't want to go to Arizona or Florida necessarily. They want to stay where they're familiar and comfortable. So
the other thing he said is that the first time in history is people are staying in their homes. It used to be an average of 6 years. It's now 10 years, which is the highest it's ever been in history.
Yeah.
What I would be curious to see is, how we can partner with folks like yourself and capture some of this data that we can start looking at this in more real time, versus looking at the census, which was so many years ago. I mean, we're so far behind trying to analyzing this stuff. If we can have access to more real-time data, more real-time information, then we can compare and then maybe have some more realistic.
yeah,
That's
this study is going to be a living document in the sense that we want to continue putting more information in there as it's available. And if you, in your recent conference have anything that would be helpful to us, you can always send it to Nancy, and we would much appreciate it so that we can begin to look at those trends.
I go to Washington DC for all the legislative and the laws that are being made, but a good suggestion for the coalition is next year in Chicago to send several people to the National Association of Realtors for 5 days and hear the trends.
Yeah.
And I am always there, but to bring people from the town with me, you'll be on the cutting edge of what is going on in this nation.
Great. Unless there are other questions, I think I'm going to ask Audrey Rowe to come up. Can you make a program announcement?
Yes.
Would you?
But feel free if somebody else has another question before she gets up here. We do have to be out of the room in a few minutes, so yeah.
I'm just wondering how socioeconomic things like free and reduced lunch plays into this. Do you look at that? Do you take that into?
We did look at that. It didn't end up getting into our report, but we have looked at the different schools, the different populations of free and reduced lunch. It doesn't always track according to race or to school, but there are, South Boynton has a very high population of free and reduced lunch, probably higher than the other elementary schools, and then it moves up. There's still a population that remains in the middle schools and in the high school. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, we didn't make it a slide in our report.
One quick thing, if you do go to our website, what we have up there is the PDF of this, and we've included the note pages because there was so much information on some of those charts, and there are explanations on a lot of the notes that accompany each chart. So you won't feel completely at sea with some of the things that we had there, because much of what we talked about today came from the notes themselves, and they'll be available to you.
Okay.
Am I on this?
Yes, please.
Thank you. We want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and just to point out that what you're experiencing tonight is just one of many of the services that the coalition provides to the community. We want to look at things through the lens of integration and understand what's going on before it becomes an issue, to give all of us an opportunity to have time to respond so we can do it in an effective, intelligent way. Other programs that we provide, and Nancy invited me up to share them with you, and I'm going to do them in the order that they actually occurred. This weekend will be our monthly integrated playgroup activity. I've got somebody back there cheering today. And this is an opportunity to give our children opportunity to play together with someone who may not look like them at a very early age. And so it becomes second nature, it becomes very comfortable. It's not something unusual, and hopefully will help to offset some of the effects of the rest of the world pushing in with racist activities. The second thing I want to mention is a preschool open house. And this is our 15th annual event. This is going to be at Columbia High School. And the thinking here is this is an opportunity for us to work constructively on the academic achievement gap. It's been proven that early childhood education is one of the major factors that creates the gap. And so if we can start children all on a level playing field with strong skills before they get into school, then we have a better chance of that gap not occurring or being diminished. And so that's going to be at Columbia High School. You may not have children of your own who are of that age, but you have neighbors and friends. So we look to you to help us spread the word. It's going to be at Columbia High School. We've got 20 different agencies signed up. So it's a smart way for families to shop for an agency that might be right for their child. And then the last thing we want to mention, this speaks to an event that many of you may have read in the New York Times, an incident that happened here in our own community at Maplewood Memorial Park. And we know that this is one incident, but it's something that stirs concern for all of us. And so we're having a coffee house discussion for people to come out and talk about their thoughts, their feelings, and what we both personally and as a community can do about this. It's going to be a coffee house discussion. We haven't settled on a final name for what it's going to be, but it's going to be something that deals with families facing racism. What do you do on either side whether you're the minority family or in the majority and you're concerned about your children's emerging perspectives, you know, how do you handle that? And so we're going to be meeting on December the 1st. It's going to be at the Woodland, and we're starting at 7:30 till 9. There's no admission. We are asking people to register, so we'll have some idea of how to prepare. So, and all of these items are included on our website, so if there was too much detail, feel free to go to twotowns.org and get all the details. Thank you so much. Are we through, Nancy?
We're done. Thank you so much for coming out.